So we now move on to the NFSP's, the National Federation of Subpostmasters, closing statement to phase 4 of the Post Office Horizon IT inquiry. And I think it's fair to say, from what I've heard about their involvement during the Post Office scandal, that the subpostmasters would see their involvement as largely negative, which possibly explains why they are now trying to distance themselves from their previous behaviour compared to the organisation that they say they are today. She does point out that, in line with the famous saying, the post office heard no evil and saw no evil, yet it seemed they did evil by speaking evil, so not following the saying to its true definition. Let's jump into the inquiry.
Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon.
Thank you, sir. The National Federation of Subpostmasters is grateful for the inquiry's permission to make oral closing submissions on the evidence heard in phase 4. The NFSP of today once again takes this opportunity to confirm to this most important of public inquiries that it is committed to assisting the inquiry in any way it can. It has watched carefully the phase 4 evidence throughout and submitted questions for witnesses to counsel to the inquiry throughout. It wants the inquiry to shine a light where there have been lies, deception and potential criminality. And of course, that is a reference to the actions of the Post Office and Fujitsu, and not to the hundreds of sub-postmasters, assistants, Crown Office employees, who the Post Office so wrongly and knowingly wrongly pursued through the courts with such great vigour. It is no exaggeration to say that the evidence throughout phase 4, taken either individually or collectively, has been nothing short of extraordinary, but not in a good way. Extraordinary in its often deliberate obfuscation. I use that word advisedly. The action of making something obscure, unclear, or unintelligible, and several, indeed many, candidates for that immediately come to mind. Obfuscation, in that never have so many failed to remember so much about what was their daily job, or even their previous jobs, or about their employer, or even who was in their team, or even what their team was called, or who led it, or crucially, who told them there was nothing wrong with Horizon, or anything at all about those whose lives they had ruined. Apparently, it's just one big collective memory failure. I don't remember, I can't recall, from one witness after another. Their evidence could be described as a collective see no evil, hear no evil, speak no evil. Unfortunately, the fourth element of that ancient saying was simply not present anywhere in the Post Office: do no evil. Alongside that ran the refrain, it wasn't me, or it wasn't my job, or it was someone else's job, but I can't remember who. The colloquial version of the Scots criminal law defence of incrimination sums it up perfectly. It wasn't me, a big boy done it and ran away. Extraordinary in that some, and some might say a lot, of what was heard simply defied belief. Witness statements as evidence for court proceedings being signed as truthful by witnesses who didn't even write those statements. So-called experts being instructed without having the requisite expertise, or even if they did, without being given all the relevant information. Witnesses who today think that those they investigated and whose convictions were quashed in the criminal appeal courts are actually still guilty. And so it was on the basis of the way these people did their jobs, whether it was on the computer side of things, technical support, software, legal, auditing, investigating, and prosecuting, that hundreds were wrongly convicted and had their lives ruined. And over and above those convictions, there are all of those, including the convicted, who paid money to the Post Office for the alleged shortfalls, again pursued with a level of vigour that is almost indescribable. And where is that money? It must amount to tens of thousands, if not millions of pounds, apparently all in the pocket of the Post Office. Was it funding their bonus, or just going into the bottom line of profits? As a result of the way in which many of these witnesses gave their evidence and disclosure failures throughout, it is submitted there must be a concern as to how it is that the inquiry and you, sir, can get to the bottom of all of this. However, the NFSP has faith in the clear, dogged and forensic way in which the inquiry is working and is determined to assist it wherever it can. While the NFSP was among those lied to on an industrial scale by the Post Office about Horizon for many years, the NFSP of today knows that its commitment to engagement in the forthcoming Phase 5 will shine a light on all of those involved in the response to the scandal as it emerged. It stands ready to acknowledge and accept where the organisation of yesterday failed. It welcomes the opportunity to deal with that alongside those of others involved, including the courts, unions and representative bodies and other organisational bodies. The NFSP of today is committed to working with others and campaigning on the speeding up of the quashing of criminal convictions, compensation, the Horizon shortfall scheme, while also trying to ensure that post office branches up and down the land are supported by the public and not boycotted due to the damage that has been done to the words post office as a result of this scandal. Whatever some have said about the past, the one thing the NFSP of today can say loud and clear is that it is prepared wherever and whenever necessary to publicly criticise the Post Office, and it does so here today, loud and clear. In terms of disclosure, it's submitted that Phase 4 has highlighted, and indeed the inquiry has been plagued by, the Post Office's disclosure failures. There's the original failure to fully and properly comply with their disclosure obligations under earlier Rule 9 requests, and the ongoing failure, for whatever reasons, to provide documents which are relevant not only to forthcoming phases, but which may have been relevant to this and previous phases. It appears from the Phase 4 evidence that there is a culture within the Post Office and those who work with them that understanding and ensuring that proper disclosure has occurred is always someone else's responsibility, and then to blame others when it has not occurred. Investigators, including the head of security, blame the criminal law team, despite usually being disclosure officers themselves. See, for instance, the evidence of Stephen Bradshaw on the 11th of January and also Tony Marsh on the 5th of July. The Post Office criminal law team allegedly relied upon their investigators, their reports and their disclosure schedule, despite having their own duties in relation to disclosure. See, for instance, the evidence of Rob Wilson on the 12th of October. The external legal team blamed the Post Office's instructions regarding this. See the evidence of Andrew Bulk on the 15th of December, and expected to be told if there was a problem. All of this despite the duty to ensure that all disclosable documents were made available to the court. And as a result of the failures by the Post Office either to obtain all of the relevant and necessary documents, which would, for instance, show transactions, or to fully disclose what was known about Horizon, or both of those things, Postmasters and others accused of theft, embezzlement, false accounting and other crimes, and those representing them, didn't stand a chance of proving their innocence. The NFSP believes the evidence shows that the Post Office and those instructed by them to pursue action against Horizon users failed to provide full disclosure to those subject to investigations and court actions. They failed to provide full disclosure to those they investigated, especially if they were not represented. See the evidence of Tony Marsh on the 5th of July, and more recently Robert Daly on the 23rd of January. The NFSP considers that this evidence shows the Post Office has a past and ongoing issue with disclosure. In respect of how they investigated and prosecuted subpostmasters and others, there was the failure to routinely recover ARQ data due to the annual limit imposed contractually, beyond which the Post Office would have to have made payment to Fujitsu. See, for instance, the evidence of Natasha Bernard on the 10th of November and Debbie Staple on the 14th of November, Tony Utting on the 17th of November and Mike Wilcox on the 7th of December. And that was despite the knowledge that this vitally important data, if disclosed, would allow a cross-check with the transactions the Postmaster said had taken place. The NFSP submits that it is frankly unacceptable that the Post Office's failures in disclosure have significantly and repeatedly delayed the hearing of key witnesses such as Gareth Jenkins and have allowed other witnesses to claim that policies and procedures were in place that were not available to the inquiry for us to see. Given that this inquiry, with its statutory powers, threat of sanctions and public scrutiny, has struggled to get the Post Office to comply with disclosure obligations, the NFSP is concerned that once this inquiry has concluded, the Post Office will continue to fail to provide proper disclosure to those undergoing investigations or in other proceedings. The NFSP is therefore concerned that this cultural attitude within the Post Office will prevail and will continue to adversely affect NFSP members, other postmasters, Crown Office employees, managers and assistants in the future. And without the ongoing scrutiny of a public inquiry, there will be no person or organisation with enough power or resources to hold the Post Office to account on a daily and ongoing basis. This is the experience of the NFSP today in its dealings with the Post Office, and it notes the inquiry may address this in Phase 7 when considering recommendations about the future of the Post Office.
So there's certainly some efforts here on behalf of the NFSP to distance themselves from the organisation as was before compared to the organisation today. Whilst it's not been an area that I've had time currently to deeply delve into, everything I've heard about the NFSP involvement from subpostmasters and from things reported in the media has been largely negative. One of the things that sticks in my mind is the fact that Lee Castleton's membership fee was refunded to him. I'm not sure whether he actually ever received an official response as to why that was the case, but the suspicion is that it was, we don't want to get involved in a battle with the Post Office, so here's your membership fee back, which is the last thing you expect of any union organisation that's there to support the workers. She was at pains to highlight the issues of disclosure which have been widespread in terms of the inquiry, but also highlights issues with disclosure to the inquiry. So separating out the issue of whether evidence was disclosed properly in court cases for subpostmasters, and also whether evidence is still not being disclosed properly now to the Post Office inquiry when they are making references in their testimony to certain things which don't appear to be available to the Post Office Horizon IT inquiry.